I've seen this one commented more than once. Quite a lot, actually. And rest assured, I had planned it to happen, just never got around to it. Well, no more tomorrows. Today is the day. It's time to figure out what would happen in a world where the Joestar Clan were a clan of Konoha. I'm too excited about this one to go into a long intro, so let's hurry up and jump right in. But first, welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, only 25% of our viewers are subscribed, so if you're a fan of the video, please like and double check if you are subscribed. And with that out of the way, let's get into the video. The history of the Joestar Clan is a history that's a secret to all save the Joestars themselves. In ages long past, their clan patriarch, Jonathan Joestar, was one of the distant descendants of Hagoromo Otsutsuki, born of the union between the descendants of Indra and Ashura. With chakra closer to that of a descendant of Hagoromo himself, a particular Kekkei Genkai awakened within him. A particular jutsu type that mixed both the physical energies of the Yang release and the illusionary energies of the Yin release. Jonathan Joestar was the first to awaken this brand new type of jutsu that allowed him to form beside him a representation of the spirit within. Due to how it stood by his side at all times, he called this jutsu Yin-Yang release Ghostly Ripple Standing Guardian. For short, he called it a stand. The history of the Joestar Clan began during the Warring States period, as the Senju and the Uchiha fought due to hatred. The Senju, of course, attempted to do the best they could to not participate. They viewed the war as needless. That was until another clan that had once been close with the Joestars were wiped out. How it happened at that time was unknown, but there was one survivor, a man named Dio. He was accepted into the Joestar Clan in hopes of helping him reform his own clan. Jonathan would only later come to realize that Dio had been the one to destroy his clan. Having discovered a particular jujutsu technique distantly related to the cult of Jashin, he gained pseudo-immortality and regeneration, but in exchange he required an intake of blood. Testing his new abilities, Dio eradicated his own clan, and now he craved the power that the Joestars possessed. One night, he faced off against the head of the Joestar Clan himself, Jonathan Joestar. Jonathan told him that what he had done was shameful, and while he hated the idea of completely extinguishing the bloodline of another clan, he believed that Dio did not deserve to even be called a Brando any longer, and set about avenging Dio's clan. The two battled, and though Jonathan's stand gave him the advantage, allowing him to behead Dio, Jonathan's heart was soft. In his desire to at least offer Dio a proper burial, he approached the head, only for Dio to prove himself not as dead as Jonathan had hoped. Landing a mortal wound on Jonathan, he would remove the head from Jonathan's body and attach himself to it. This was everything Dio craved. This was the power of the greatest of the Joestar Clan, and now it was his. The power of a stand, the power to alter the world as he wished. Using his newfound power of yin-yang release, Dio learned to stop time for 10 seconds, which gave him enough time to nearly eradicate the entirety of the Joestar Clan. However, the Joestars, in a desperate attempt to stop Dio from using their Kekkei Genkai to conquer the world, used their own stands to seal him away for what they hoped to be forever. Then, as the war drew to a close, the Joestars would follow the Uchiha and the Senju and join the new village, offering their allegiance for protection. It was decades later after this that the wife of Jonathan Joestar passed away. The grandson of Jonathan would take up the role of clan head. His name was Joseph Joestar, and through his daughter, he too gave rise to a grandson. That grandson's name was Jotaro Kujo Joestar. From a young age, Jotaro displayed control of his own stand. As per the rules of their clan, while they could use yin-yang release, because they were not the sage themselves, there were limits. The limits of this was that whatever personalized version of the technique they formed, that was the only one they could ever use. In most cases, these personalized stands were somehow reflective of the user, and Jotaro was no different. Always being rough around the edges, a powerful warrior slept deep within him, resulting in his stand forming the appearance of a barbarian. It was a strong stand, and Joseph recalled it being the same type of stand as the clan patriarchs. Thus, his yin-yang release, Ghostly Rippling Standing Guardian, received the name Star Platinum, after the star mark that all of Jonathan's descendants received on their neck. As Jotaro entered the academy, he wasn't the only one from the clan to enter. Distant cousins of his, Noriaki Kakuyin of the Joestar Clan and Jean-Pierre Polnareff of the Joestar Clan, would also enter the academy. They had also developed stands, and theirs were known as Hierophant Green and Silver Chariot, respectively. Hierophant Green possessed several abilities, related similarly to Crystal Release in its sub-ability, which allowed it to form crystals from Earth and Water Release, while Silver Chariot only seemed to display incredible speed. Jotaro's stand didn't appear to have an ability either, though it seemed to be stronger than the other known stands. Jotaro was a real hellion in his younger years, fighting against anyone who even dared look at him wrong. He had a disdain for authority, respecting only the Hokage. His grandfather Joseph once called him to his office to speak to him about it. "Jotaro, I heard today that you got into a fight. You put another kid in the hospital." Jotaro sat there silently, not talking about it. "Why? Why did you do it?" Jotaro looked at Joseph. "'Cause he was a prick." Joseph began to rub his eyes, watching his clan's good name being squandered by an unruly grandson. "What did he do to you?" "To me? Nothing. To Polnareff, he said his hair looked like a baguette someone had sawed in half and sprayed with chrome. Made Polnareff cry, so I broke the guy's arms." Joseph sighed. "Even if he had done that, you just can't break a guy's arms. And what's worse, I heard that when a teacher tried to stop you, you knocked them out. They're recovering from a concussion right now. They're your teacher. They're supposed to be respected, Jojo." "Why should I respect them?" he asked, drawing from Joseph's shock and confusion. "Because they have a higher place than you." "Why do they have a higher place? What did they do to earn it? I have no issue offering someone respect, but that person needs to deserve it. They need to be stronger than me. That teacher wasn't, or else they wouldn't be in the hospital now." "And what of the Hokage? What about Lord Hiruzen? Is he worthy of your respect?" "Is he strong?" Jotaro answered with a question. "He's the strongest shinobi in all the village. That's a requirement to be Hokage." Jotaro shrugged. "Then I respect him. I respect the strong and those worthy of their positions." That became a running theme for Jotaro. He didn't respect any shinobi who wasn't as strong or stronger than him. For that reason, Jotaro ended up remaining in the academy for far longer than he normally would have. Not because he couldn't graduate, but because even though he couldn't find a jonin as strong as him. So Jotaro, Kakyoin, and Polnareff each remained without a mentor. That was until Joseph decided to do something about it. He sent his strongest shinobi to be the mentors of Jotaro, Kakyoin, and Polnareff. That jonin's name was Avdol. He had previously been the personal consultant of Joseph and had been a bit of a fortune teller in the clan, hoping to name stands and helping others to discover their destinies through them. Joseph sat there with his arms crossed. "The old man has some nerve trying to send a new jonin for me. You know, sometimes it feels like you don't even want to be a shinobi, Jotaro. I will only work under someone stronger than me. If they're not up for the task, I don't want them." Avdol smiled, laughing internally at Jotaro's statement. "Then I suppose that's why Lord Joseph sent me in." Jotaro sat there, his feet kicked up on the desk he sat behind. You believe you're stronger than me." Avdol raised a brow. "And what would you do if I said I was?" Jotaro's feet slid off the desk as he sat forward. "I would test that theory." "Then yes I am," Avdol said. Jotaro stood and weaved a few hand signs, summoning his stand. Avdol stood there without moving. "Summon your stand, Avdol. Prove to me you're worthy of being my teacher." Avdol's smile turned to a grin. "I will, but not here. Not on school property. You may have no respect for people and their belongings, but I do, and I'll only fight you in an open area." "Then move your ass," Jotaro said, pointing to the door. Avdol, having been propped against a wall, stood at his full height and began leading them out into an open field. Once again, Jotaro summoned his stand. Avdol would summon his as well. It took the form of a highly muscular humanoid with the head of a fowl of some sort. Jotaro drew closer, knowing that the range of his jutsu was limited to anywhere between 2 and 3 meters. Avdol drew closer as well. His stand was also close-ranged, meaning he needed to draw closer. In the blink of an eye, the two stands clashed, their fists meeting with enough force that the air around them fled. Polnareff and Kakyoin covered their faces to protect their eyes from the debris. Jotaro continued to push forward. Avdol was surprised by the sheer force of Jotaro's strikes, but he himself continued to push. It was true. Jotaro's stand had the raw physical strength that surpassed even his own, which Avdol had already known to be impressive. He had known for some time that Jotaro's stand was a brute forcer. After all, he helped name it. However, he hadn't assumed that there was this much power behind it. He wondered if that was just the natural potential of the stand being brought to bear, or the potential of Jotaro himself shining through. All he knew was that Jotaro was strong, but that wasn't what Jotaro needed to learn. Jotaro needed to realize that pure brute force was not enough to win every battle. He had to think. He had to be intelligent to win. It wasn't always about steamrolling your opponent, and sometimes it required more than that if you were to beat a slippery one. Avdol jumped back, his stand retreating with him. As he did, Jotaro approached him. "Why are you running? Are you not strong enough to handle me, master?" Jotaro said with a bit of slight sarcasm at the end. Avdol smiled. "No, I'm definitely gonna teach you a lesson, one you'll never forget." He weaves hand signs as he does his stand. "Fire style, red bind!" Suddenly, the stand fires red flames out that grip Jotaro by the ankles, wrists, and neck. pinning him to a tree, causing his stand to dissipate. Avdol drew closer to him. The more Jotaro struggled, the tighter and hotter the binds grew. Eventually, Avdol stopped right in front of Jotaro. Magician's Red gripped Jotaro's shoulder and raised a fist to pummel him. All the while, Jotaro didn't flinch. "Go ahead, do it." Avdol smiled and waved his hand, calling back his stand as well as the red bind, causing Jotaro to fall to his knees. "I don't have to. You've already conceded in your heart. You know there's no winning, so you tell me to end it quickly. Because of that, I don't have to end it. You already have." Jotaro looked up at Avdol. Avdol looked back down at him. "There are so many things I could teach you, but you gotta understand the pecking order first. I'm top dog. If I say something goes, it goes. If I say it doesn't fly, it doesn't fly. And you respect that decision." He offered his hand to Jotaro. Jotaro looked up at the hand again from his position, then up at Avdol with a scoff before taking his hand. "You better stay worthy of the position I'm giving you." "I'll be worthy of the position I've earned," Avdol said. He then looked at Kakyoin and Polnareff. "What about you two? Do you want to test my strength as well?" They quickly shook their heads no, drawing a laugh from Avdol. "Good, then follow me." He began to lead them off to begin their missions. For the most part, the missions were easy, and the longer they did them, the more Avdol was impressed by their rate of growth. He began to think that maybe they were due for a new promotion. As this came along, though, it wasn't the only thing occurring in the world. Joseph would receive word that something had happened. According to reports, the seal that had been placed on Dio had been broken, and those responsible for maintaining it were now dead. "Inform the Hokage," he said. Sitting back, he recalled the stories he heard about his grandfather and how this man had defeated him. Looking back down at an image of his grandson, he began to feel like the only one with the power to deal with this newfound threat was going to be Jotaro himself, as only his stand displayed these same characteristics of their patriarchs. As word reached the Hokage, he sent people out after Dio in an attempt to destroy the threat before it even got close to them, but time after time they failed and the shinobi scent would be lost. Not much long after this, the Chunin exams would be planned, and due to how much Jotaro and the others had grown, they were allowed to partake. Jotaro, along with Kakyoin and Polnareff, would then walk into the place. "Looks like we're not the only ones here to take the test," Polnareff said. "Well, of course we won't be. These tests are going to include shinobi from other villages as well," Kakyoin said with a smile. "Looks like we've got our work cut out for us." Polnareff looked back. "Do you think we stand much of a chance here?" "Don't worry about it," Jotaro said. Jotaro was giving off a cold, uncaring confidence that seemed to say, "I don't care if I win or lose, but nevertheless, I'm not going to lose. These losers will never surpass me." And Jotaro actually thought that way. One might consider it to be overconfidence, but to Jotaro, he just couldn't sense anyone really being able to surpass him at his stand. In the time he spent training under Avdol, he came to realize his stand's true potential, or what he believed to be at least the stepping stone to his true potential. Star Platinum's reaction time was greater than most other shinobi. He found himself noticing and reacting to things almost as if he had a Sharingan, though he didn't. How it worked, Jotaro wasn't sure, but to his senses, it almost felt as though things were slowing down. His speed surpassed what was expected of most shinobi his age, and his accuracy was even greater than most of the Uchiha who possessed a Sharingan, something he made many bets about and got into many fights over. His stand was becoming the ultimate tool, and that was in no small thanks to Avdol. Despite everything, Avdol made a very good teacher. He had done something very hard to do, and had earned Jotaro's respect. Jotaro was now sure that he could maximize his potential as a shinobi under Avdol, and was certain to see the fruits of his labor. In ways, he was already seeing the fruits of his labor, and was eager to utilize them against the greatest genin from around the world. He wanted to prove himself, and show the world that they were nothing compared to him. As soon as the doors opened, they entered into a classroom where there were seats. Jotaro took one of the seats closest to the back. Kakyoin sat in a seat nearby, while Polnareff sat toward the front for fear he would miss something important. Jotaro kicked back. That's when the proctor came in. A beast of a man, he explained that the test would be written, and that they would be measuring their pure skill. Jotaro was not intimidated. While academia wasn't his most honed skill, he wasn't exactly a slouch. He could learn when he put his mind to it, but he generally had to be something that interested him, or something he was already good at. That being said, he was already a good shinobi, so he anticipated that he'd do well enough on the test. As the papers were passed around, Jotaro took a gander at the questions on the page. The more he looked them over, the more his brow furrowed. What kind of questions are these, he wondered. This is the kind of crap you'd expect a jonin to know, not a genin. He looked around as the test began. He shook his head and began to grab his pencil. Looking around and thinking about the rules, he began to realize that cheating only docked points instead of a flat-out dismissal like it normally would have been. He began to realize that this test had nothing to do with whether or not you were intelligent, but whether you could gather information without being detected, something every shinobi was expected to be capable of doing, especially Chunin. With that in mind, Jotaro assumed that there must have been answers somewhere in the room. Using Star Platinum, he had it scan the room. Once it found the information he was looking for, it began to write it down in the proper areas. After having done that, Jotaro kicked back in his seat and waited for the test to come to an end. It eventually did, with Kakyoin seeming concerned. Polnareff was sweating buckets, something that drew a smile from Jotaro. Guess he couldn't handle the heat. It was then that they'd be informed that the tests they took were absolutely meaningless. Jotaro's smile turned into an enraged scowl. "You mean to say you wasted our valuable time?" he called from the back. The proctor looked at him. "Maybe I did. And what if I were to say yes?" "Then you and me got a problem, buddy," he said. The proctor walked back to where Jotaro was sitting. He knocked his feet off the desk. Jotaro immediately stood up until he heard a whisper. Looking over the shoulder of the proctor, he saw Kakyoin viciously whispering and motioning for Jotaro to control himself. He took a breath. "What is?" the proctor asked, motioning for Jotaro to continue his sentence. Jotaro took another deep breath, attempting to quell his anger. "What is the actual test, sir?" He grit his teeth the whole time he said this. The proctor smiled and began walking back to the front desk. "The true test," he shouted loud enough for everyone to hear, "is the final question. If you notice at the bottom of your pages, there's an open box. I will write a question on the board, and it's your job to answer that question correctly. But be warned, if you mess this up, you'll never be able to become a Chunin. That power was given to me by each village's leader. If you fail to answer the question correctly, you'll never become a Chunin." There was an audible gasp in the room. The proctor looked back. "But before I write down the question, I'll offer you each a chance. Get up and leave now, and you'll remain with the option to become a Chunin later. Or stay and face the question. Failure is not an option. What do you say?" Many genin got up and began to leave. Kakyoin looked over at Jotaro, as did Polnareff. They seemed to want to know what to do. Instead, Jotaro simply picked up his pencil, signaling that he was ready to take the test. In return, the others also did so and prepared for the question. Polnareff was shaking like a leaf, absolutely certain he would screw up this question. Seeing the others who remained, the proctor smiled. "To those who remained, I congratulate you on your courage. Now here is the question." The proctor spent some time writing it down. When he was finished, he stepped to the side. The text read, "What rank are these tests designed to help you achieve?" Jotaro was confused. "All that fuss for this?" Polnareff from the front shouted, "Hey, I know the answer to that one." He began writing it down. "This has to be a trick, right?" Jotaro wondered. He used Star Platinum to scan the room. "No trick," he said to himself. Was this really the hardest question, worth more points than the rest of the test? With a sigh, Jotaro wrote it down. Chunin. Tossing his pencil, he leaned back in his chair. The proctor would then gather up all the pieces of paper and would briefly peek at them as if he were grading them. "Congratulations, you all pass. You're free to move on to the next test in the exams." As they were leaving, Jotaro couldn't help but ask what it was all about. Kakyoin stated that it seemed to be an exercise to determine whether someone had the grit to risk everything they wanted for a chance to be a shinobi. Jotaro assumed this must be correct, because he had no better answer. After this came the Forest of Death, a true rite of passage for any genin hoping to become a Chunin. In the Forest of Death, they were given an Earth Scroll and told to attain heaven, as in the Heaven Scroll. Let loose on the rest of the forest, Star Platinum's precision and ability to notice things easily, as well as speed, made locating any genin with the Heaven Scroll easy. With the pure speed of his stand and the physical strength of it, few genin really posed much of a threat for the three Joestar Clan genin. After gaining the right scroll, the three of them made it to the center of the forest where they would pass the test. They would take some time off while waiting for the rest of the genin to pass or fail. Once the final results were in, they'd be allowed to begin the first set of exhibitions, which were a breeze for the most part. But as the second set of rounds began, things slowly began to get more and more rough. Jotaro managed to make it to the finals, but the semifinals were split between Kakyoin and Polnareff. One of them would need to fall here, with the winner facing Jotaro personally. Walking out into the stadium, the bright lights before a cover of darkness bejeweled by stars, Polnareff heard the roar of the crowds and couldn't help but wave to them like a victorious knight making his way back home after a rough battle. And in truth, that's what it was to him as he walked out. Still, there were 2 battles left for him to face before he could prove himself to be the best genin, and that would be Kakyoin and Jotaro, the only real genin to give him any trouble. Opposite him, Kakyoin entered the stadium with a smile, seeing Polnareff wave at the others. He found it heartwarming to see him enjoying his moment, but the spotlight was shared, and only Kakyoin had the brains to be able to face off with Jotaro. As he stood there, he began to consider the way that he'd have to face Polnareff. Considering Silver Chariot's speed and piercing power, Hierophant Green would no doubt be overpowered if Polnareff grew too close. However, he knew that with his crystal style, Emerald Splash, he could keep Polnareff at a distance, and if he kept them distant from him, he would be able to win, as Polnareff had less range than Kakyoin, and he possessed no projectile attacks. Kakyoin felt as though he had this wrapped up. As they stood before each other, their stands by their side, Kakyoin reached his hand out to Polnareff, who took it. The two prospective Chunin shook hands, as did their stands, in a show of good faith toward each other. After that, they proceeded to move at a distance. To agree, Kakyoin felt this was a bit unfair to Polnareff, who would now not be able to attack him. But opting to give the one he saw as a brother the benefit of the doubt, he decided to give his all in the fight. As the match began, Polnareff and his silver chariot rushed toward Kakyoin, who would begin jumping back to flee from his friend's proximity. He'd begin assailing him with crystal release emerald splashes, which would strike from a distance. Polnareff would slice the emeralds out of the air as he continued to try and get closer to him. Despite everything Polnareff was trying, he was not capable of getting close to Kakyoin. "Come on, Kakyoin, you gotta actually engage me." "No, I don't. I'm taking my own stand's advantages and positioning them and myself against your stand's disadvantages. This is how a battle in the real world works, Polnareff." "Maybe so, but no one likes a spammer," he shouted. "Spam or no spam, if you can't beat me like this, then you can't hope to beat anyone out in the real world." Polnareff clenched his fists. "Damn it, I was hoping to save this for Jotaro, but it seems that if I'm gonna have any chance, I've gotta use it against you." Kakyoin was confused. What? Suddenly, it looked like Silver Chariot exploded. "Polnareff!" Kakyoin shouted as he grew nervous for his friend. As the smoke cleared, though, it became obvious that Polnareff was more than okay, but his stand had shifted. It had taken on a different shape, one without as much armor. "This is my armor-off form. Believe it or not, but my quick stand is actually weighted down by its armor." Suddenly, Polnareff's stand began to move so quickly that it almost seemed as though it created 4 clones. But in truth, those are afterimages. Kakyoin is shocked by this development, but returns to a confident smile. "Even if you can get close enough to me now, without the armor, your defenses go down." But suddenly, Polnareff was right in front of Kakyoin. "That's true, but only if you're quick enough to hit me." Silver Chariot begins to strike out at Hierophant Green with his rapier. Its attacks are parried quite desperately by Hierophant Green, who has formed 2 rather large emeralds in his hands. It pushes the attacks away. As it does so, it tries to flee back to begin the emerald splash again, but Silver Chariot is on it too quickly. Kakyoin knows he's in trouble. Alright, plan B. He continues to remain on the defensive. As he moves back, he jumps around, touching the ground, the wall, and anything he can. Silver Chariot is after him, but before he can get close, Hierophant Green moves again. "Stop running away," Polnareff demands. Kakyoin refuses to answer. He continues what he's doing. Suddenly, as they take the positions they had when they first started, Kakyoin sits still and waits for Polnareff to come closer. As he does, there's a feeling of tension and then a snap. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an emerald splash is fired. Polnareff can barely fend them off. "What is this?" he asks. He then notices that the entire arena is covered in long strings of membrane from Hierophant Green. "Every time you snap one of those, you'll get attacked by my emerald splash. This attack simply can't be deflected." Hierophant Green attempts to charge his attack. "Without a projectile, you're finished," Kakyoin said. Polnareff lets out a sigh. "I wanted to save this as a secret too," he whispered. "Please let this fly true." Silver Chariot raises its blade and lets out a puff of air and pressure as its saber's point flies toward Kakyoin. Kakyoin is shocked and unable to defend himself properly while charging the emerald splash. The blade pierces through Hierophant Green's shoulder. Kakyoin cries out as blood begins to drip from his own shoulder. Another drawback of most yin-yang release ghostly ripple standing guardians. Due to the connection to the user's chakra and very soul, the damage done to the stand harms the user. And now that Hierophant Green had been wounded, the membranes seemed to deteriorate. Suddenly, Polnareff and Silver Chariot with incredible speed rush forward and begin to strike out at Hierophant Green, hitting it strongly. With one last strike, he sends both it and its master, Kakyoin, flying into the wall. He laid there, now unconscious, as Polnareff takes up his discarded items and calls back his stand. He walks over to Kakyoin and kneels down to check on him. Polnareff is declared the winner, and Kakyoin would be taken off to the infirmary. But before he leaves, he smiles and gives Polnareff a thumbs up to acknowledge how well he did. Polnareff couldn't help but smile. He actually beat him. Now, all that was left was Jotaro. The next match was set up quickly after Polnareff was given a little time to rest. He and Jotaro would meet outside in the arena again. As the match begins, though, Jotaro notices something out of the corner of his eye. Dio stood there in the crowd, smiling, his pilfered Joestar Clan birthmark open for everyone to see. He speaks the words, "the world," and stops time. He then makes his way into the Hokage's box, where both Hiruzen and Joseph Joestar are waiting. With his stand, he easily punches a hole into both of them. "Look at the two of you, the head of the Joestar Clan, and you, Lord Hokage, the most powerful shinobi in the whole village, and yet, you don't even know yet that you're already dead." In the arena, time had stopped as well. Polnareff wasn't moving, but despite this, Jotaro was aware. "Wow, I knew I had incredible reaction time, but who would have thought this?" he said in reference to how time had stopped and yet he was still conscious. Suddenly, time returned, and when it did, both Hiruzen and Joseph were flung from the Hokage's box down into the arena below. Polnareff and Jotaro saw this, and the crowd began to panic. Jotaro and Polnareff ran over to check the two out. "Mr. Hiruzen, he's dead," Polnareff said. Jotaro held Joseph. Joseph looked at Jotaro. "Jotaro, Dio, he's returned. Only you can save the village from him. Your stand and his are the same type." Joseph began to weave hand signs. When he was finished, he put his hand on Jotaro's chest. "Take this. It's my final ripple." Suddenly, Jotaro felt his body overdriven by incredible power. His stand let out a battle cry in response. "Old man," Jotaro said. Joseph looked at him. "Please, defeat Dio. Save the clan. Save the village." Joseph then passed away. Jotaro stood and looked up at the box. Within, Dio stood. That was when various shinobi entered the room, Anbu and Jonin all together. "Surrender!" they shouted at him. Dio turned around to face them, hissing, showing his teeth. They threw kunai, but as they did, Dio seemed to disappear. "Where did he go?" they demanded. Above them, hanging from the ceiling like a bat, was Dio. Dropping down, he summoned his pilfered stand and began to eviscerate the shinobi in the box until none remained. As he bathed in their blood, he felt the life-giving essence transferring the very lifespan of his enemies to him. "Dio!" a voice said from outside. Dio turned around to see Jotaro standing there. "Oh, are you approaching me, young Joestar?" Jotaro's stand manifested beside him with a shout. "I can't kick your ass without getting closer," he said. He began to walk toward Dio as Dio did the same. With a roar, their stands began to clash. Catching his fist, Star Platinum put a right hook into the jaw of the world, causing it and its master to be thrown out the window. There, Dio used his pilfered chakra to hover in the air. Jotaro, seemingly forgetting his old limitations prior to Final Ripple, began to hover in the air as well. Dio wiped the blood from his lip. It seems that you carry with you the will and spirit of Joseph, but that won't help you," he said as his stand readied to fight. Jotaro smiled. "Look at you, hiding behind your immortality like a crutch. You were too weak to remain mortal. True power's lost on you." Dio growled. "I'll show you true power. The world!" Suddenly, time stopped. 10 seconds remain, he said as he drew closer. "You won't even see your own death," he said as he prepared to strike through him. Suddenly, Jotaro's body twitched. Dio freaked out and moved back. Did he just move? But only I am supposed to be able to move and stopped time." Suddenly, time returned. Dio looked at Jotaro. "Tell me, could you see me?" Jotaro's already present smile turned into a grin. I wonder indeed." Dio took a deep breath and recollected himself. "No matter. Even if you can see me in Twitch, that doesn't make you anywhere close to my level." "You want to bet your life on that?" Jotaro asked. Dio sneers. "Continue to stall, young Joestar. Your death is at hand, and all you can do is slow it momentarily." Dio grew closer. He attempted to strike out at Jotaro, but Jotaro managed to catch his fist with his own. As the two continued to fight in the air, Jotaro managed to knock Dio down to the ground. Rising up from the ground, Dio smiles at him and shouts, "The world!" Time would stop again. Dio grew closer to Jotaro and proceeded to slap him in the face, but Jotaro doesn't react. "As I thought," Dio said. "You have no power to stop me." Standing back, Dio pulled kunai after kunai and began to throw them at Jotaro. They stop in space just in front of Jotaro. Dio smiles. Sure, he has won. 9 seconds, he says. 10 seconds. Time begins to move again. But just as he says that, Jotaro speaks. "The world." Dio's mortified. Time does not start again, and Dio finds himself unable to move. Jotaro knocks the kunai aside. He walks over to Dio. "I see that the old man was right. We really do have the same type of stand." He smiles. "This is going to be fun." He begins to pummel Dio, his fist striking against Dio's flesh over and over again. "Ora! Ora! 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 Ora!" He strikes Dio with a massive punch. Suddenly, time begins to move again, and every strike Jotaro had thrown lands all at once. Dio lets out a cry as his body is thrown into a wall. Blood is everywhere. Bones are broken and shattered. He lays there for a moment as Jotaro grows closer. "I could kill you right now, but I won't. I want to give you a second to regenerate. I want to beat you at your full power so that as your body crumbles, you know you are nothing." Looking at Dio's wounds and the speed at which the wounds healed, Jotaro speaks. "How long will it take? 5 seconds? 10? As soon as you can move again, all bets are off." Dio sits there in shock, growling. How could a mortal like him, a genin no less, defeat him? Dio, the king of demons! He catches his breath as his wounds are nearly healed. He smiles. Take this, Jojo! Dio throws his hand forward, flinging blood into Jotaro's eyes. Jotaro closes his eyes and raises his hands as to wipe it away. Dio capitalizes on this by standing on his regenerated legs. His stand, the world, appears in front of him and begins to swing its leg into a kick. Still blinded, Jotaro can sense the attack coming. Summoning Star Platinum releases a full power punch into the leg of the world. The two strikes collide. Cracks in the knuckles of Star Platinum appear, causing Jotaro's own knuckles to begin bleeding. As he winces in pain, Dio laughs. That is until he notices the cracks on the world's shin. Slowly, the cracks begin to spread up his leg, across the chest and over the face. Dio shouts out, "No, this is impossible! I am Dio! I cannot be killed, not by a weak pup of the Joestars! I am Dio!" Suddenly, as the stand shatters to pieces, so too does Dio's body. Jotaro stood there over Dio. "You made one mistake, Dio. Just one. You pissed me off." Dio's body was shattered, but despite that, he was still alive. With his regeneration hampered, not only by the insane damage dished to it, but also because his stand was destroyed, he was unable to regenerate. Without his stand being able to regenerate, Dio was left unable to do so as well. At least for now. But Jotaro knew all this stuff, and it was no big deal for him. He remembered his grandfather's stories. In exchange for immortality, Dio had to drink blood, and he had to avoid sunlight. Like a true vampire, the sun would turn him to dust, killing him for good. All Jotaro had to do was wait for the sun to rise, and as it did, he watched as the first rays of it began to burn Dio to ashes. Finally, his great-great-grandfather's soul could be free, but he lamented the death of his own grandfather. But Jotaro was pleased, now that his clan could be free from their past and capable of moving forward. And that's exactly what Jotaro did. He not only passed the exams and became a Chunin, but also became a Jonin later on, as did Kakyoin and Polnareff. The future looked bright for the Joestar Clan, as it did for Konoha, and Jotaro would be sure to watch it all unfold, protecting both with his strongest of stands, Star Platinum. And that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I honestly had hoped to make this sooner, but I wasn't entirely sure where to make everything go. From how to add stands into Naruto to how I wish to translate the history of the Joestars to this new world, there was a lot to consider. I hope it was exciting though and enjoyable. I certainly enjoyed it. Maybe one day we can make a sequel. Maybe Dio has a son, hint hint. Wouldn't you like to see that? Star Platinum versus Gold Experience Requiem in the Naruto world. Heck, I'd like to see that in the JoJo world. But anyway, if you liked it, be sure to leave a comment telling us about your favorite parts, things you think could have been done differently, and things you'd like to see in the future. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos as they drop, and while you wait, check out these other great videos from our channel. Until next time, peace.